Serving in pain. I look into the life of Jacob in Genesis 32:22 to 33. To be biblically faithful, I must acknowledge that the concept of service or leadership, which our topic connotes, is not really one that fits the profile that Jacob lives. In fact, under normal circumstances, one might even use Jacob as a classic case study or Bible study in the futility of duplicity or deception. When we look a little bit closer and examine the plot, when we shift our focus from the main character, Jacob, we realize, as we did in our previous study, that the main character is really God. It is important that I emphasize this main character so we can put perspective on Jacob's dilemma and understand that God was not colluding with sin and imperfection. In fact, this is another of those TV screen types whooping of the devil's plan to remind him, as was done in Genesis 3 verse 15 in the garden, that no matter how hard he tries, he can never outsmart or outperform God or malign God's name. My friends, the devil will try constantly, that has been his strategy as early as you can see his activity in the earth, to accuse, malign God's integrity and omnipotence. And when he is unsuccessful with that direct accusation, he takes to the marketplace and accuses God's people and tries to malign them. At first glance, we don't see a direct serving leading role in Jacob's life. When we zoom out though and catch the backdrop and the whole stage, we see that the story about Jacob's life was not essentially about the wealth he deceived his brother into obtaining. The whole of his life was about the culmination of what God was working towards. Genesis 32 verse 28. Your name will no longer be called Jacob, but Israel. Before discussing that verse though, I find it fascinating that over and over in the scriptures, before we see Jacob constantly, we will see Jacob constantly in struggle, getting by with smarts and manipulation. He might have been the grandson that read the history of the family and picked a family member to emulate. And it seems as though he picked Abraham. The father of many nations was an apparent trickster himself. But the next generation always seems to amplify the sins of the generation before it. But that's for another discourse. What I really find fascinating is that it took chapters to lay out his reputation and a single verse to reveal his character. Jesus walked about for 33 years. That record was only taken of 3-point-something years because God does not see time as we see it. God works by purpose, not by time. Jesus always knew that he was going to raise Lazarus, and he knew he would have raised Jairus' daughter. So his delay in time does not matter because his purpose must be fulfilled. This is why we shared in our previous study that we should watch God. Don't watch a problem. Watch the promise. Stop worrying about the process that you're going through. Watch the purpose that God is bringing out. Jacob is in his typical reputation when he realized he was dealing with a heavenly being, seized the opportunity to force change upon himself. But he learned painfully it does not work that way. When we secretly try to change our own lives, we may end up like Jacob, hip-shodded, bruised, and breathless. What God was doing here became clear when the man asked Jacob the question, "What is your name?" When Jacob was able to acknowledge that his smarts were not smarts but manipulation and deception, by saying, "My name is Jacob," he was coming face to face with himself, and this is where his character was born. For many of us who have failed publicly, and those times when we have tripped over our own feet and fell on our own sword, very often it happened at a time when we were secretly struggling or even trying to cover up our struggles. Now, I'm not advocating hanging one's dirty laundry in public as a means of obtaining a quiz. In fact, if we do that, we are really accusing the grace of God, for it is by Him we receive forgiveness totally and completely, nothing to do with our deeds. Our only path to forgiveness and wholeness and healing from sin is Jesus. Yet, we must confess with our mouth that we are sinners and allow His blood to take root and change us from the inside out. Jacob finally surrendered, and the man declared the character of the new Jacob. He called him Israel and blessed him. I mentioned earlier that Jacob first asked the man his name, but the man really asked Jacob first. But the response that the man gave to Jacob is fascinating. "Why do you ask, 'What is my name?'" Then he left it at that. What God is doing in our lives and the persons that He is sending our blessings through by no means should foreshadow the purpose. We see that hereinafter the whole nation took the name that the man assigned to Jacob as a designation of the bigger plan that God was accomplishing in him. God called him Israel. In closing, if we can see God's purpose, we will see His plan, and therein we'll be able to find peace. But we walk by faith and not by sight. We obsess so much with, "Lord, show me your plan, show me your will," that we miss the process toward the purpose. We miss the star. We do not realize that God does not so much want what we have, He wants us. It is relationship that God is after, not your gifts. He will use untalented people and gift them up to purpose. He will use unqualified people and use them to run circles around the trained ones. What He wants is you. He wants me. Your purpose and unworthiness does not disqualify you from the purpose. We were born disqualified. God cannot change His mind, and He cannot make a mistake. If He called you, He called you. He chose you because of Jesus. So keep serving. Don't walk away because of your mess. Walk into Him because He can make you free. Don't walk away because you failed. Walk into Him because it is in Him that you will find freedom. Don't tear down others because of the news. Bear them up in prayer because He can make all things new. Shalom. Lord, help us to see the bigger picture. And when we can't see it because you do not desire to show it to us, help us to see you, to trust you, to lean on you. And in leaning on you, O God, trusting you with all our heart, leaning not to our own understanding, help us, O God, that we will find direction for our path and our hearts turned to you. Thank you, O God, for hearing us and answering and blessing us today.